You are watching QTV. Time now for the news. The headlines. Minister of Justice, Given Lubinda, has clarified that the Parliamentary Service Commission Act has not been brought into force. Political parties taking part in the Chilanga District Chairperson by-election have pledged not to ferry any cadres from outside Chilanga during the campaign. Here now is the news in detail. Minister of Justice, Given Lubinda, has clarified that the Parliamentary Service Commission Act has not been brought into force. Mr. Lubinda says the State Audit Commission is equally yet to be operationalized. He has told QTV News that both acts require the issuance of statutory instruments, IISs, before they could be brought into force. Mr. Lubinda states that all appointments under the two commissions are therefore being done according to provisions of the Republican Constitution before the 2016 amendments. He states that this does not, however, mean that government is not following the Republican Constitution. Mr. Lubinda notes that Act 1 of 2016 does in fact provide for a transition from the old to the amended Constitution. He adds that he says he does not therefore think it is fair for anyone to create an impression that government is applying the Constitution selectively.
The Parliamentary Service Commission Act has not yet been commissioned, and so has the State Audit Commission Act. These two acts have not been brought into force. Because of that, appointing people under those commissions is done in accordance with the 1996 Constitution. That does not mean that we're not following the current Constitution, because we are following the current Constitution, which is allowed by Act number 1 of 2016. So I don't think it is fair for anyone to create that kind of impression that we're applying the Constitution selectively. Had that been the case, the matter would have been brought before the Constitutional Court. And as you know, there have been a lot of busybodies in Zambia these days. For everything they rush to the Constitutional Court. Zambians have become extremely aware of their rights. And at every turn they are challenging anyone who appears to be breaching the Constitution or infringing on their rights.
Political parties taking part in the Chilanga District Chairperson by-election have pledged not to ferry any cadres from outside Chilanga District during the campaigns. The political parties, who are the ruling PF and opposition UPND and the UPPZ, made the pledge last week on Friday, the 13th of July. In a communique made available to QTV News, today by Electoral Commission of Zambia spokesperson Margaret Chimanse, the three parties have also pledged to disband their command centers immediately after the campaign's period ends at 18 hours on the 25th of July 2018. The three political parties have further pledged to abide to the condition that voters leave the polling stations immediately after voting. They have also pledged to abide to the condition not to tolerate the carrying of offensive weapons such as machetes, golf clubs, catapults, and knives during the campaigns. This is in addition to abiding to the condition that door-to-door campaigns be restricted to a maximum of 30 persons per group of each political party. They have further vowed to abide to the condition that campaign messages be issue-based and must avoid character assassinations. The three political parties equally want police reservists not to be deployed to police elections, but that police presence be enhanced at all police stations while maintaining routine patrols. They have in addition pledged to abide to the condition that all parties strictly adhere to the campaign program outlined. Publishing of these pledges to all party members is also a condition that all three political parties have vowed to abide by. The Zambia Center for Inter-Party Dialogue, ZCID, and the Church have been called upon to quickly resolve issues surrounding the holding of the Presidential Summit. Young African Leaders Initiative Yali Governance Advisor Isaac Mwanza says his organization is worried that the holding of the summit among its political party leaders is being delayed unnecessarily. Mr. Mwanza says it is important that both the Church and the ZCID hasten in deciding how each one of them will share roles in facilitating and chairing the summit. In an interview with QTV News, Mr. Mwanza says the delaying of the presidential summit any further will also delay in refinement process of the Republican Constitution. Mr. Mwanza states that the expectation of Yali is that the presidential summit can be held either before the end of July or the first week of August. He says his organization is also of the view that this dialogue is not going to take government. If this government is not going to take place, government must ensure that the refinement process of the Republican Constitution goes ahead regardless. Mr. Mwanza says members of Parliament have the responsibility to ensure that all provisions in the Constitution that have caused controversy after the 2016 amendments are cleared up before 2021. He says it will be unwise for Zambia, for example, to go into the 2021 general elections with the 14 days constitutional requirement for a presidential petition as it did in 2016.
If the dialogue is not taking place anytime soon, our members of parliament have the duty to be the representative of the people, to ensure that they can amend the constitution. We believe that the national constitution is a national document for everybody else, and it is incumbent upon the members of parliament. That's why we elected them to go to parliament, to make for the laws on behalf of the 17 million Zambians. And so can we ensure that we have this bill taken to parliament? If this national dialogue is not going to take place, let us take the bill to parliament. If any member of parliament wants to gun down any bills, any proposals that are being made to clean up the constitution, it will be within their right, but they should understand that this is a document that will give friction in 2021. And it is time to clean it up now and not wait until 2021 when we should be removing the 14 days, which brought a lot of problems. I think that there is an opportunity for us to clean up the laws and have a good law before 2021 elections.
The Patriotic Front government has been warned to be cautious that the refined constitution it wants to give the Zambian people will one day come to haunt them. Senior citizen Dante Saunders is reminding the PF government to keep in mind that they will have only themselves to blame when they are out of power under such a constitution. Mr. Saunders says he has taken note that while Zambians want a refined constitution that protects everyone, those in government seem to be more interested in saving their interests. He has told QTV News that if anyone like him would come to power after the PF government has been removed from the office, he would use the same constitution to deal with them ruthlessly. Mr. Saunders states that it will be then that they would realize how bad it is to have a supreme law of the land that serves more of the interest of those in the government than the people. He says he remembers very well that the same thing actually happened to then MMD government when it was removed from power because of a bad constitution.
The people of Zambia want a good constitution which can protect everybody. But with all this corruption, economic plunder, misappropriation of funds, selling of our land to foreigners and so on and so on, this same constitution that they are using in order to try to quieten the people of Zambia is going to injure them. Because if I took over government today, I will use this same constitution to deal with these people ruthlessly. And it will be within my constitutional right to deal with them. Are using this same constitution, they will feel how bad it is. Because Lubinda and PF know quite well, we fought against MMD because of this bad constitution. We are on record. Lubinda is on record when he was in opposition. And all of PF, they're on record.
Former Foundation for Democratic Process FODEP Executive Director McDonald Chipenzi has threatened to sue his former employer over his unpaid dues. Mr. Chipenzi says he has resolved to take FODEP to court before dialogue in claiming his payment that was due to him since 2016 has proved futile. He says he finds it painful to draw FODEP to court as it is an organization he earlier worked for as information officer for 4 years and later led as executive director for almost 6 years. In an interview with QTV News, Mr. Chipenzi says being a person that does not pretend but believes in transparency and accountability, he has, however, kept quiet for too long over his unpaid dues. It says that it is hypocritical for the current FODEP management and board to run away from their responsibility while at the same time violate the law. Mr. Chipenzi says a Pandora box will now be opened in order that all those who feel they can make others suffer just because of their lenience and respect for FODEP should pay, and he says it should not matter at this point through what means they will have to do so.
And now a Pandora box will be opened so that those guys who feel that they can make others suffer just because someone is very lenient and very tolerant and respectful of the organization, will have to pay through whatever means they will find the money to pay. I was the chief executive, and I know the status. I know the status at which I left for the party. I know how many contracts I signed and how much money was in contracts. So I feel so sad that even with all that monies that were left, that I left, and when they were so quick to say, McDonald, leave, because you want this money, today, those people cannot pay any to me. I think time has come for those who pretend to be unveiled that these are pretenders and are hypocrites.
An international policy research think tank, International Growth Center, IGS, has observed the need for policy stability in Zambia's taxation system. IGC Country Director Anand Rajaram says policy stability in taxation is necessary if Zambia is to attract future and increased investments. In an interview, Mr. Rajaram says changes in tax policies results in a country losing credibility. Mr. Rajaram states that the Zambian government should put in place firm and long-term tax policies in major sectors like mining and manufacturing sectors. He says the stable policies for these sectors increases investments, which in turn create more employment opportunities.
Well, I think one of the things about policy is, in any area, but particularly tax policy, from the point of view of a private investor, is you want to provide some kind of stable tax regime so that they can make long-term investments with a sense of what is the potential tax liability they will face and how best can they make a profitable investment. Changes in the tax policy that are made frequently is actually quite worrying to private investors. And the more you do that, the more the government loses credibility, and it will have less effect in terms of attracting future investments. Now, mining and other areas, I know that about 15 years ago, the government offered a lot of incentives to bring new investment in the mining sector because it had been underinvested for many years. But there have been some policy changes to the windfall tax and changes in the royalty rates in Zambia. So I think this is a somewhat delicate area. It's best to think about a long-term tax policy for the sector, make a firm commitment to it and hold on to it, and not, because once copper prices go up, people start suddenly thinking, well, they're making a lot of profits, we should change the tax rate, we should change the royalty rate. But that's the nature of their business. They suffer the pain when the prices go down, and they reap the benefits when the prices go up.
The Zambia Revenue Authority, ZRA, has called on property owners in the country to start paying withholding tax on rent. ZRA Commissioner for Domestic Taxes, Moses Shuko, says the authority has now made the system of paying withholding tax structured and systematic. Mr. Shuko says various stakeholders and agents have since been involved and engaged. He says the authority has employed the necessary available technologies, including GPS, in the area of withholding tax, payment and collections. Mr. Shuko has also disclosed that the authority will commence physical surveys of real properties throughout the country, and he says this will be done in collaboration with various stakeholders, and that those found wanting will be penalized as prescribed by the Income Tax Act.
What we have been doing in the background is to plot the current payers of withholding tax. So we have plotted those that are paying, which areas they are paying from. So for instance, if I talk about Kablonga, we know how many people are paying withholding tax on their properties. We know which properties are owner-occupied, and we know which properties are rented. So that process will go on for all the areas. We'll zone them in such a way that we simplify the way the agents will be operating. So the way the process will be is that we will have known which areas the people that are paying are coming from and the people who are not paying. And so when we are deploying the resource of the agents, the extra hands of the agents, they'll basically be targeting the non-payers. And so we'll do it throughout the country and ensure that the new properties that are coming on board are also updated on our system. We employ technology available, including GPS, so there will be no property that we will not have on our register. And then we'll actually be able to update in terms of who is renting, whether it's rented or it's actually owner-occupied. So my encouragement to the public is that if you have any property, you do well to register on your own and begin to comply before we catch up. Because when we catch up, we basically have to take into account the back taxes. So our message is that we are trying to encourage voluntary compliance. And so as long as you have property, you do well to come through the Revenue Authority, register, and begin to account for withholding.
The Center for Zero Waste and Development has added its voice in calling upon governments to quickly ban the use of plastic bags in commercial and household packaging. Chief Executive Officer Billy Lombe says such a move will effectively deal with the current littering crisis in Zambia. He has told Q News that plastic bags are the major causes of drainage clogging and littering, which results in outbreaks of diseases like cholera. Mr. Lombe says the negative effect of using plastic bags is also extended to the rivers and water bodies in the Zambia, where it disturbs aquatic life. He states that there is need for awareness, especially among youths and children, on the dangers of plastic to the environment.
We would like to call upon government to take more serious, keen interest in the ban of single-use plastic bags, because they're quite problematic, especially that we came from the cholera which hit us so hard some few months ago. I think more has to be done. Our drains should be the thing of the past, to see our drains get clogged every year and see more cholera cases coming up and people dying. I think it's important that the government put up specific measures to ensure that they ban on the use of single-use plastics, and also on a certain type of plastics, if they cannot ban, then you have to ensure that there's a fee attached to that, which can go to support initiatives or to support any other efforts in making sure that our environment are clean, and this is also key in achieving our clean, green, and healthy nation that we want to achieve. And also that is good for our Vision 2030 as a country.
Zambia Association of Manufacturers Chief Executive Officer Chipego Zulu says there is need for Zambia to exercise caution with regards how quickly it signs up to the Continental Free Trade Area and the Tripartite Free Trade Area agreements. Mrs. Zulu says there is still a lot that needs to be done and put in place to increase Zambia's participation in terms of trade in the COMESA and SADC region. She says currently Zambia's participation in the trade is very low at only between 5 and 8% in SADC and COMESA, and therefore more measures needs to be put in place to increase their participation before it signs to the Continental Free Trade Agreement, which is trade on larger scale. She says Zambia needs to make the policy environment for manufacturers conducive and address issues of cost production before it can sign up to free trade agreements, as that move will mean that it will be competing with countries whose economies are developed.
I think we as industry and as a manufacturing sector have been requesting that we take it a bit cautiously in terms of how quickly we sign on to the agreement. We do have to recognize the fact that in as much as it opens us up to a much larger market in terms of billions of Africans that have the potential to buy our products, it also means that it opens us up to a higher level of competition. Currently, we are already part of SADC and COMESA, and in terms of the amount how much we've been able to take advantage of that, there is still a lot of work for us to do to increase inter-African trade, and especially from our end, exporting into SADC and COMESA. Currently, we're estimated to be at levels of 5% and 8% in terms of our trade in these two regional blocks. So when we add a much wider one, which is looking at the Continental Free Trade Area, it tells us that there's a lot of work to do in-house before we can actually participate in this larger Continental Free Trade Area. And so it calls for manufacturers in Zambia to be more adequately prepared to participate in this larger market. And there are a number of interventions that have to come into play. And this is looking specifically at the policy environment being very conducive for the growth of the manufacturing sector. We have to be able to meet demand at a continental level, not just domestic or not SADC and COMESA, but rather to billions of people. and we also have to be able to compete with more sophisticated or developed economies in Africa, which means that Zambia needs to address issues to do with the cost of production. We need to address issues to do with the ease of doing business as well, if we're to compete in these larger markets.
Southern Province Minister Edify Hamukale has encouraged farmers in the province and across the country to interface with the pricing information both domestically and regionally. Dr. Hamukale says this will help them make profits from their maize and other grain sales. He says much as Zambia offers a liberal market, there is need for the farmers to make their sales in a view of making profit and not losing out. Dr. Hamukale states that farmers should not rush into selling off their maize at any price given to them by briefcase farmers without comparing and consulting on various prices on the ground. He has also encouraged farmers to use technology and media platforms to avail themselves with the pricing information during the maize and grain marketing season.
Whatever the farmers do, they must do it with a view to make profit. Because farming is a business. I would like to encourage the farmers to interface with all sorts of information. They should listen a lot to radio, they should listen a lot to television, and those that have access to the internet, interact with Zamase, where pricing information is readily available about commodities, prices that week. And then also they can further look at commodity pricing at regional level. They can utilize SAFEX, because we cannot stop them from selling. Our interest to ensure that they become better farmers, they make profit from year to year. The Honorable Minister of Agriculture did mention that very soon we will be announcing the FRA price, which will be more or less a guide for domestic marketing, and also to interface with import-export parity pricing. And so really, we cannot stop them from selling. This is a liberal market, but we should ensure that they access as much pricing information as possible, both domestically and regionally, so they don't make losses. Opposition
UPND Mumba Ward Councillor Jones Mulunga has bemoaned the non-availability of Constituency Development Fund CDF in his area. Mr. Mulunga has told Q News that his ward has not received anything from the 2018 CDF despite the year being halfway gone already. He says such a situation is hindering development, and Mr. Mulunga has disclosed that most schools that are supported from allocations do not have computers and pupils sit on the floor during classes. He says the poor road network that has not been worked on due to lack of funds is also negatively affecting the farmers, especially during the rainy season.
I think the performance of central government in terms of the treasury releasing funds meant for development as budgeted from the 2018 budget has been below average. I think I can confirm here, I can actually sit and confirm that for Mumba constituents, the CDF for 2018 hasn't been released, and the CDF for 2017, what was released was just a partial 50%, and the other 50% wasn't dispersed. And as of now, as we speak, the CDF for Mumba constituents hasn't been released. But you see, this is what we're talking about as councillors and as young people to say, I think we need to do more in terms of budget tracking and also engaging our MPs and our leaders in general to be able to understand this process, to say it's just not a matter of going to Parliament to approve the budget and then presenting the paper every October and all those things. At the end of the day, if we have a liquidity squeeze in this country, somebody should be able to be responsible enough to come and tell the people to say this is what is obtaining. Because as it stands now, we have the 2018 budget which was passed and which is low, and government is mandated to be able to release that money so that we are able to put up the infrastructure, we're able to repair the roads. Very soon we're going to go into the rainy season. We were talking about the food reserve agents, the price, the floor price for maize. Food reserve agents is not buying anything and nobody's saying anything. Now you see, all this is tied into central government not releasing the funds that are meant for development. We have a lot of challenges, for example, in our ward. We have secondary schools where children are sitting on the floor. I think the performance...
And that's what we heard in the news, but before I take a run, here's a recap of stories in the headlines. Minister of Justice, Given Lubinda, has clarified that the Parliamentary Service Commission Act has not been brought into force. Political parties taking part in the Chilanga District Chairperson by-election have pledged not to ferry any cadres from outside Chilanga during the campaign. And that will be for the news. Thank you so much for your time. Bye-bye. God bless. Keep watching QTV.